right, so welcome everyone to today's GVI Workshop Series installment on intimate partner violence and the intimate partner violence intervention. We have a great presentation planned for today, which we'll get to in a few moments. But first, we'll do a little bit of housekeeping, NNSC overview, workshop overview, and a tiny bit more info, quick breakout room introductions, and then we'll get into the meat of today's presentation. So an overview of NNSC, or the National Network for Safe Communities, for those who are new to us or new to the work, or new to these workshops. NNSC is an action research center based at John Jay College here in New York that implements proven strategic interventions. NNSC works to reduce violence, build trust, and transform public safety in partnership with communities all around the world. So this workshop series is meant for new, interested, and returning partners to this work, the work of violence prevention, the group violence intervention, and other innovations like that. The National Network is just that. It's a network of sites all around the country and world that partner with us to implement these various strategic interventions: GVI, the group violence intervention; IPVI, the intimate partner violence intervention that we'll talk about today, and more. These workshops are for folks who are just coming to this work. So folks who are working in a site that is newly contracted, newly working with NNSC, sites that are interested in this work, jurisdictions that are interested in this work, or anyone who's interested in this work in general. There's space to learn about and discuss violence prevention, focused deterrence, and new innovations in the field. Each session, you'll hear from experienced NNSC staff members, trusted partners, experienced experts, and participate in roundtable conversations with them. Each session is open to any and all who are interested in approaching this GVI strategy to violence reduction in their communities, whether it's community-based organizations, law enforcement officials, municipal workers, social service providers, academics. Anyone who wants to learn about this work is welcome here. Before we get into the introductions and this week's session, I just want to quickly highlight an upcoming GVI conference that is taking place in Jacksonville, Florida next month. The GVI Reboot Stronger Together conference will happen from November 7th through 9th, hosted by the Jacksonville Sheriff's Office, supported by us, NNSC. It's a free conference open to all, just like these workshops. And if you want more information or to RSVP, anything like that, you could contact Garland Scott or Brenda Kelly with the information on screen. I'll also put it in chat later in the session and get more information there. It's going to be a great opportunity to meet folks doing this work, folks who are interested in this work, and kind of experience a lot of what we've been learning in these past sessions in practice, or learn from practice in various presentations, panels, etc., happening over those few days. So we invite all of you to join, and you could reach out to, like I said, Garland or Brenda for more information, or me, and I can help direct you to the proper channels. So with that, we're going to break out into some small groups for just a minute or two to do a round robin introduction. Just say who you are, where you're from, what brings you to this work. We'll do that for a couple of minutes. Then we'll always jump back here in the main session to introduce today's speakers and the meat of today's presentation. So, right, and everyone is here, great. So welcome everyone again. My name is Michael Akinpora. I'm a research and policy advisor here at the National Network for Safe Communities, or NNSC. And in sessions so far, this is the GVI Workshop Series, we've been talking about GVI, the group violence intervention, and the various components each session, and kind of building and getting a full understanding of how that intervention works and how to implement it. But for today's session, what we're going to do is learn about the intimate partner violence intervention and a bit more about intimate partner violence and kind of the interplay between the two interventions and how to address intimate partner violence alongside the GVI work that we've been discussing in the workshop so far. So without further ado, I'm going to hand it over to two of my amazing colleagues, Rachel and Fatma, who will do introductions for themselves and a couple of the amazing speakers we have today, and then we'll get into today's presentation. So I will pass it over to you two.
Thank you so much, Michael, and thank you everyone for joining us today. I will keep the introductions brief, not because I don't have lots to say, but because I want us to be able to dive right in. thank you all for giving us some space during Domestic Violence Awareness Month to talk about this. We're really excited and looking forward to what comes out of it today. Um, for everyone, just to give you some brief introductions, I'm Rachel Teicher. I'm one of the directors of strategies and interventions here at the National Network for Safe Communities. I'm joined by my colleague Fatma Zara, one of our deputy directors of strategies and interventions. Um, and she and I have been leading the work that we do on intimate partner violence for a number of years now here at the NNSC. And in that work, we've had the privilege and the pleasure to work with some incredible partners. And two of them have been kind and generous enough to give us some time to speak today about their experiences doing this work. First, we have Tim Ellenberger, retired captain from the High Point Police Department, Major Crimes Section. And we have Cassandra Seyfert, Director of Projects for the Intimate Partner Violence Intervention in Ulster County, New York. Both of them are people that I have worked with here at the NNSC for a very, very long time. I'm so excited that we get the chance to talk about the path that we've all taken in thinking about how can we address intimate partner violence a bit differently than our systems have done it before. What we know about what works about something like GVI and a focused deterrence approach to reducing and preventing violence. And think a little bit about the intersections where we know that there are points of contact for individuals that are high risk, right, for causing harm or being harmed, right, and how that can show up in an intimate relationship or, right, in the context of gun violence, group violence, or other contexts in our cities. So with that, I'm going to start just jumping right in. I'm going to turn this over to talk first about kind of how we collectively, as an organization at the NNSC and as a group of individuals thinking and working on violence prevention, got to a place of wondering how could we successfully and safely adapt what we know is effective to a very different, very sensitive context around intimate partner violence. So I'm going to ask Tim if you could start things off for us and tell us a little bit about the focus deterrence work that you all were doing in High Point and how you all came to decide that it was time to take what you knew and apply it to intimate partner violence.
Okay, thank you. We started focused deterrence work back in the late 1990s. If you can go to the next slide, I think it'll show yeah, there we go. You can see that red line there. That's our violent crime trend. It's indexed per 100,000. So the number of homicides or the numbers are all indexed numbers. So in the late 1990s, we were a hot little town of about 75,000 people, but we had an extremely high crime rate. We had several particularly violent incidents back to back. A group of community members came to the police department demanding some change. And instead of driving a wedge between the police and community, our leaders then came together with the community members to search for a new way of doing things. And what we came across was focused deterrence and David Kennedy's work. And so we started applying some of those principles. You can see right there, VCTF, that's when our Violent Crimes Task Force was formed. And we started initially dealing with chronic offenders. You can see that we got that red line trends down significantly. We got a little bit of breathing room. And then it trends back up around the early 2000s. And so we did a problem analysis, or what we like to call, we unpack our data and see what's causing the violence. In this case, it was violence in open air drug markets. So we tweaked the focused deterrent strategy that we had already used with the help of National Network for Safe Communities to address the violence that occurs in open air drug markets. Got another decline in crime. The red line keeps trending down, which is what we want to see. And then it started trending back up a few years later. Another problem analysis was done, or we unpacked our data and realized we had a group violence problem. So we employed GVI with the help of the National Network for Safe Communities and our other partners, and drove it down again. All the while, we were still doing the chronic offender notifications quarterly. We were in the maintenance phase of the drug market intervention, but now we're doing GVI strategy as well. As we trended down a little, our leaders realized, okay, if we're going to be serious about this work and we're going to call ourselves champions of focused deterrence, we're going to have to deal with what's slapping us in the face, which was intimate partner violence. And what we had done over the years is what I compare to peeling an onion. And so we took the first layer of that onion away, and with our chronic offenders, and we did that for several years. And then what's left on the outside of that onion is the drug market violence. And then we peeled that away, and we're left with some group violence. And then we were left with what was still there and had always been there, was intimate partner violence. So you can go to the next slide, please. So when we did our problem analysis, one out of three of our remaining homicides were intimate partner related, including two murder-suicides that happened within about 12 days of each other. We also realized we were responding to a lot of calls and spending a lot of time, and we weren't getting very far. So when we realized this was our impact of the agency, we contacted the National Network for Safe Communities and said, what do you got for domestic violence? And David Kennedy had already done some research and had a pretty good idea for some strategies. So the first thing we did was we formed a partnership. Initially, that partnership was National Network for Safe Communities, High Point Police Department, federal and local district attorneys. Family Service of the Piedmont was our victims advocates arm. High Point Community Against Violence was our support and outreach and offender services section. UNCG did our research for us. So we wanted to make sure that we were using real objective data on this. So we had UNCG helping us with that. And what we found is that just like the results that we had with chronic offenders and drug markets and group violence, we were able to control violence in an intimate partner setting. I also need to mention that when we started, it was just the police department, maybe a prosecutor, and a handful of community members. But as we went through the years, having a little bit of success, forming strong partnerships, we were able to build that group into a much stronger. High Point Community Against Violence is a very strong organization now, and they carry a little bit of weight now in the community. And so every time we employed one of these strategies and we strengthened our partnerships, it made the next one a little easier, because we didn't have to convince our prosecutors that this is what we want to do. I know it's different. They had already experienced it too. So it built trust and some legitimacy throughout the community. And when we said we wanted to do it with intimate partner violence and take on this approach, we already had those partnerships formed. So that made it a little bit easier than probably Cassandra had, because we had 15, 20 years of doing this type of work with some of these same partners. As we worked through the working group for intimate partner violence, we started having to add partners when we realized we had gaps. And so we added someone from Child Protective Services. And Child Protective Services came in because we had some questions. Some of the advocates were dealing with victims who were worried about losing their children to the courts and children being taken away. That's a big fear for domestic violence victims. We also had to add a magistrate because we had some questions about, we had a mandatory bond on intimate partners, but that definition didn't include boyfriend, girlfriend, or had been dating for 2 years. So we had to bring in a magistrate there to try to close some gaps and answer some questions there. And we also brought in partners from the Latino Family Center, the YWCA, and other partners like that. So our partnership expanded over the years, and and we just kept going stronger. I will say also that I did that for 8 years. So one person kind of being I guess you would say I was the project manager, or played that role. But one person doing that and providing some consistency actually helped a lot too. Our prosecutors were still there. We also had probation and parole support. So, but having some consistency there did help us a lot, I think. So the impact was, in the 5 years prior to implementing this intimate partner violence strategy, we had 52 homicides in those 5 years, 17 of which were intimate partner related. So about a third of those, all those homicides were intimate partner related. So you can see that we were using data to guide our strategies. When we started employing this strategy, we didn't just open up one day and say, here it is, we're implementing at all levels. We had to take small steps too. So it took us about 2.5 years to get fully implemented on everything that we were doing. And in the 5 years post implementation, 1 out of 18 homicides were intimate partner related. So we dropped it from 1/3 to about 5%. But we also noticed that all of our homicides went down too. So we went from 52 in the 5 years pre-implementation to 18 in the 5 years post-implementation. I'm not a data analyst. You probably should talk to some other people on this panel about reading those numbers and such of that. But I think what happened was we had a compounding impact on all of these different strategies that were providing outreach and support for certain types of offenders, and just partnerships in different areas of the city, and then a community that was willing to work to assist those that need assisting and deal with those that need dealing with. That's all.
That's all. It was only, years and years of work, but that was it. But thank you for that, Tim. And what I think we're gonna come back to a lot as we talk a bit further is how important a couple of things are that you highlighted. And I know I'll talk about this, and I know, Cassandra will, and Fatima will. You've named things like partnerships, legitimacy, right? Starting small, being focused, and consistency. And I think if anything, that should resonate a lot with this group of people here today, that we often are challenged in how do we solve these very big, scary, serious problems, many of them critical, many of them at crisis level. And we can get really stuck trying to come up with a solution. And what I really appreciate, and I think this is something that we all do pretty well, is we're able to break it down into what are the things that you can do, right? What are the small, consistent steps? How do you do your homework? How do you prepare? What does it mean to have the right people at the table, focusing on the right people, meaning the people that are at highest risk, whether they are victim survivors or they're individuals that are at risk of causing harm to someone that they were currently or formerly in a relationship with. So I think we're going to pick up on a lot of that as we talk about kind of where it went from there, which is, after a very successful trial in High Point, we had the opportunity to start to develop more of the thinking. And for us at the NNSC, that was learning from all of you, that was getting the opportunity to work with the Kingston partners and the Ulster County partners. And so if we can go to the next slide, just to spend a couple of minutes talking about some of the things that went into the drive to make this a strategy that would have a noticeable impact. And what we know is, despite many of our best efforts, sometimes we are not able to have the impact that we want. And for many of us, we are in communities where we don't have all of the resources that we would want on any given day. And I know it's a shock to everyone. We make do with the little we have and we stretch it. But a lot of the traditional interventions that we have for an individual who's causing harm in a current or former relationship, are not effective because we don't have some of the things you mentioned, right? We don't have easy access. We don't necessarily have programs that can be engaged and consistent and meet people where they're at and be accessible for them, right? And we also know that sometimes the services that are needed just don't exist, right? And we can't expect for people to stop what they're doing, right? Make better choices if we are not giving them real substantive help. And we know that focusing on the person who's causing the harm is an opportunity to shift the burden of what it means to address intimate partner violence. Next slide. Thanks. So with all of that in mind, we thought these are our guiding principles for thinking about adapting the work to intimate partner violence. Right? First and foremost, we're always thinking about how we can do no harm. Again, unintended consequences, right? There's always an impact for every action, but we want to be really thoughtful about not putting anyone at additional risk. And the idea is to continue to focus on and center our work around the needs and voices of victim survivors, but not make them feel that they are responsible for stopping the violence, right? So if we are able to focus on the person who is causing the harm and reaffirm, right, that this is coming from a collective, right? This is the law, violence is wrong, right? And that we want to help you if you will let us, right? But if you make us, we will have to focus on you and try to stop you. Finding ways to then layer in the key influential voices of community members, right, of victim survivors, right, and setting up a new norm, setting up new expectations, right, where a victim survivor will get connected to opportunities for help and service, whether or not they want to participate in a case, right? But at the same time, police and probation and prosecutors and social service providers and counselors and advocates, everyone has a role to play. And that looks like focusing on stopping someone from causing more harm. Next slide. And as Tim has mentioned, and as many of you have probably heard from some of our other workshop series, it's actually not a secret. It takes all of us being a part of this work and reaching across those aisles. So it's not about just one agency or one perspective coming to the table and trying to solve and address everything. Right? It is a collaboration, a hands-on collaboration between law enforcement and social service, right? Our vital community members, right? And our partners in every area of this work, right? So to what Tim, you mentioned earlier, the way that your team of partners expanded over time to reflect the needs of what you were seeing and being able to think, how do we have the most strategic, the smartest, and the safest impact in people's lives, right? Well, we know that someone who's causing harm might need this, and we know that a victim survivor might need this, and we know that we need other tools as officers, as prosecutors, right, as probation officers. And so harnessing everything from everyone is actually a way to get that coordinated response really focused on the individuals that are causing the most harm.
Thanks, Rachel. Yes, thank you for pulling this slide up, Michael. So what we know in the field of intimate partner violence is that violence occurs at different levels of severity. IPVI takes that into account and works with communities to engage each level of abuser with a very specific approach. In this strategy, continued offending results in promotion to the appropriate higher level, along with new messaging and a sanction if needed. For IPVI, and the tiered approach goes from D to A, with D being the lowest level of severity and A being the highest. So the A level tier involves the most serious and concerning IPV abusers, but it is also the smallest proportion of IPV offenders in a community. The majority of IPV abusers actually commit low-level offending and are at the D level. For IPVI, there are 4 distinct levels of offending, and you're seeing a bunch of letters on your screen. DCBA, what does that all mean? Just looking at this structure as an example, you'll see that Ds are where there's an indication of intimate partner violence in the relationship. Cs are where there is a first known offensive IPV has been committed. Bs are where an individual has demonstrated repeat offending. And As where the individual is undeterred by previous messaging or commits an act of violence so serious that they're immediately classified to this level. So again, what does this ladder mean? What do these letters mean? It means that those falling under the D level classification have an opportunity to receive messaging that deters their behavior, along with a sincere offer of help. For those that fall under the A level category, it means that the community places extra special attention and focus on these individuals to stop or pause their behavior. While the extra, focus and attention can be additional work for partners, it's also important to remember that the group of A-level individuals are really a small group of individuals. And just to be clear, this is not a one-size-fits-all by any means. What is considered to be a D in one jurisdiction may not be a D in another jurisdiction. The same goes for all the other levels of this IPVI criteria. The actual criteria for classification can't be copy and pasted from one city to another. To really understand what the actual IPV offending dynamics are in every community, NNSC actually works with those cities to analyze what's going on when it comes to intimate partner violence, and then collaboratively work to design a criteria that's appropriate for them. If we can move on to the next slide, we'll talk a little bit about, again, we know that IPV, there's violence occurs at every different level. We know that there are going to be individuals that may not stop and will continue to reoffend. Those individuals that continue to reoffend will actually move up the ladder. While they may have entered as a D, they may now be a C based on their reoffense. Individuals can actually work their way up the ladder to become an A, which is an individual who's considered serious and concerning. Every time the individual causing harm commits a known IPV offense, they receive tailored messaging at each level. Additionally, not only do those causing harm receive the messaging, but so do victim survivors. So you'll hear us talk about IPVI being, focused on, behaviors of those causing harm, but centrally, it's always victim-centered as well. In knowing that there are these different levels of intimate partner violence offending, it really makes sense to tailor a community response and law enforcement response. This chart provides a summarized glimpse of how some sites have developed messaging and notifications for each IPVI tier. Parallel notifications for both victims and those that cause harm are direct and tailored. These notifications are really important because they reduce misinformation, especially for victim survivors who in the past may have been receiving information solely from their abuser. They instead are now getting information from the partnership of what's happening and what the partnership is doing to stop and pause the violence. The benefits of these notifications to the abusers is that it can really deter them from committing further acts of IPV. And it does that by clarifying the legal risks and consequences for their behavior. But also, it's an opportunity for them to hear about resources that would support behavior change. These resources can be big or small. We really like to emphasize with cities that we're working with, it's the big small stuff. So help with getting food. It might be help with getting diapers. It might be help with assistance with education, along with those bigger services such as substance abuse treatment or counseling or batterers intervention as well. If we move to the next slide, I'm going to kind of bring it back to what Rachel was talking about before about traditional IPV responses. So IPVI is non-traditional. And I know sometimes when we think of the word non-traditional, we might be a little skeptical, like, oh, I don't know. I don't know if there's a lot of validity in something being non-traditional. This strategy is non-traditional because we have to be. The traditional approaches don't work. IPVI is non-traditional, but it's also effective. And it's effective for the following reasons. The messaging that's given through IPVI helps reset expectations and behavior. Abusive partners understand there's going to be some sort of action taking place should they continue their behavior. And victim survivors understand that the community is going to do something about the violence, and they're not alone in stopping the abuse. IPVI is also important because the messaging in it is clear and concise. Those causing harm know that their behavior will not be tolerated, and victim survivors will know that they're no longer alone in making the abuse stop either. The strategy also has to address IPV in different angles. Going through the criminal justice system for an IPV offense is one process, but sometimes that may not be the only route to stop that behavior. For the most serious and concerning individuals that are not stopping, looking at other legal exposures is an option, but so is looking at other creative means within the community. Thinking about, crime reduction through environmental design, even thinking about having community members stepping up to deliver stronger messaging to those individuals causing harm. IPVI also helps strengthen legitimacy. The quick and accurate information given out by the partnership through messaging and actions really reinforces to victim survivors that they can trust law enforcement and reach out for help. Simultaneously, Those causing harm recognize that law enforcement and other partners will work towards interrupting the violence. Now, this strategy cannot be law enforcement alone. I think there are good intentions when people try to do that just within, certain systems, like we'll just work within the law enforcement system. But it's not enough. It can't just be law enforcement, and it honestly can't just be social service providers. Systems saying that this behavior is not tolerated is great, but there needs to be more. For those causing harm and for those experiencing harm, they need to know where the community stands on this issue. IPV isn't a private issue that happens behind closed doors. It's actually a public safety issue. And as a public safety issue, this is an opportunity for community members to do their part, to do some of that elevated messaging that violence is not acceptable, but there's also support and help for those wanting to change their behavior. And then so much of the strategy is about certainty, and IPVI helps ensure some of that. Too often, for those causing harm, they have come to believe that nothing will happen to them because historically IPV has been seen as a lesser crime. The IPVI strategy changes that experience with partners, giving timely messaging and taking timely steps. They are, through this tailored messaging, through these steps, they're able to stop their behavior and make clear that this is not going to be tolerated. This consistency with the messaging and follow through by partner action is actually placing additional attention on those causing harm, creates a new culture in addressing IPV. Those causing harm have never experienced this. But there's attention of my actions. Like, if I continue to reoffend, the community is going to say something. The community is going to do something about it. And IPV survivors feel this too. They feel that there will be action taken, and it's not just on them to make that movement and make that change. Most importantly, this really shifts the burden from the victim survivor. It's not about telling the victim to stop the violence by going to the shelter. Partners from the community do the heavy lifting to figure out how to stop causing harm. Partners do the essential work of giving resources and safety planning with victim survivors, but they take the lead in actually stopping the violence. And that is non-traditional, and that is unique, and that is powerful and validating for victim survivors looking for support and help. So I, have talked a bit about what Rachel and I have both talked a bit about, like the framework, what IPVI looks like, but we want to shift a little bit here and talk about the impact of IPVI in another community. We've implemented in several cities throughout the US and are currently implementing in one international site, and want to highlight some of the great work being done in Kingston, New York. So let me introduce you to Cassandra Seifert to talk about the impact of IPVI in Kingston.
Thanks, Fatma. So we actually, I'll give you a little bit of the history. Before my time, before I was hired for this position, the Division of Criminal Justice Services in New York State noticed that Ulster County, in particular, the city of Kingston, had a high amount of aggravated assaults. So DCJS approached our former DA and said, hey, we know about this intervention. We really think that, you could benefit from this. Go down to Manhattan and sit through the IPVI University sessions and see if this is something that you could do. So lo and behold, former DA Carnwright said, yeah, I think we can do it. The city of Kingston police chief said, yeah, I think we can do it. And we pulled it together, and they hired me within, I think it was in about 5 months. I started on March 6th of 2017, and by March 6th of 2018, we had begun implementation in the city of Kingston, which was quite remarkable because we really worked hard within that year. I'm sure Tim can relate to all the fancy footwork, right? And thank you for paving the way with some of the IPVI stuff, because then I didn't have to do it. You did it for me. No, just kidding. But yeah, and it's a lot of work, as you all know, who's on the call with as a project manager. So we began implementation, and as you can see in the next slide, our domestic incidents have ebbed and flowed. So we were really high when we first started in New York State. For those of you that are not familiar, police officers are required to complete a domestic incident report for any domestic related incident. So these are the incidents prior to us implementing the intervention. During COVID, though, we did see a significant decrease in the amount of domestic incident reports that were being taken. And we sort of brainstormed this a little bit and thought, people in COVID were stuck. No one could really go and visit anybody else. There was a real significant fear factor, I think, in victims reporting that they were being abused. And then in 2022, we even saw a further drop. It went down to 131 domestic incident reports. However, this year so far, and I don't know if it's a good sign or a bad sign, our domestic incident reports in the city of Kingston are up over 200 DIRs for that department. So to me, that says a couple things. Either domestic violence is increasing in our city, or people are actually reporting. So you could look at it from two lenses. But we have done pretty well with our reoffending rates. The national reoffending rate for domestic violence offenders is anywhere between 60 and 80%. Fatma, if you can go to the next slide. I'm not sure if that's the next one or the one after. So we are currently at 34%, I think is what you just told me today, 34%. But when the national network had run our stats right after 2020, we had gone up to 38%. So we were seeing during the pandemic that the top level offenders were reoffending at a higher rate, which was driving our reoffending rate through the roof. And we didn't have a lot of domestic incidents by number, but the incidents that we were seeing were really significant. They were really, really violent in nature. So what we did during COVID was we were like, all right, how do we address these individuals causing harm? We typically had done the call-in, but we had switched to custom notifications during that time because we were able to meet in smaller groups. We were able to do the custom notifications, not necessarily ideal, but on Zoom. And we were able to continue the work, this work, a lot of us honestly from home, a lot of us were remote doing this work, but we made it work. You can go to the next slide. So just to back up, we've had some really good successes that maybe aren't measurable per se. So when we're talking about the progress that we've made in the custom notifications and whether or not the intimate partner violence offenders are actually hearing us, we had one, I'll just give an example. This young gentleman, he's probably about 19 or 20 years old, and the chief in the meeting was explaining to him about how the intervention works and that he is now a B level offender. So he's receiving his B custom notification, and he doesn't want to see his name come across his desk, because if that's the case, we're going to have to start holding him more accountable for his behavior. And the kid's like, well, I don't want to have a label. Why do I have to have a label? I don't want to be a B. I don't want to have a label. So we're like, okay, well, the kid is hearing this. And so within the next couple of days, I called him and I followed up and I asked him, if he was willing to accept any of the resources that were presented to him, and so on and so forth. And he was stuck on being labeled as a B. He says, I don't want to be a B. I don't want to become an A. I said, well, it looks like you have some work to do. So it was really interesting that, he was so stuck on this labeling, but realizing that it's a problem. If he doesn't stop this, the ramifications could be a lot worse for him. But the phone call ended well, and we left on a good note. I was able to relate to him a little bit, but and just another couple things to add to our interventions progress. When we started, they had, between crime victims probation, intermittently parole and the DA's office, they had what they called their multidisciplinary team. But the team when I started was a little disjointed. They didn't meet all the time. There wasn't a whole lot of information sharing. The Kingston City Police Department was not sending over domestic incident reports, even to the district attorney's office, for like weeks at a time. So there was a real lapse in information sharing. When we started this intervention, we developed our IPVI email within our group of people that are on the task force, which is a very large group. And we had some hurdles, with the information sharing. People really, were operating in silos. They really wanted to hang on to their information for fear of it getting out and not trusting each other. Now, I mean, it's amazing the amount of work that we get done by email. Where the team is emailing, and this is a good and bad thing, a healthy and unhealthy thing. We're emailing, midnight back and forth about, okay, this offender just came in. We need to forward it to this ADA because we need a bail argument on such and such. Okay, crime victims needs to reach out to this victim first thing in the morning. We need to make this a priority. And probation, they'll find out right away whether or not their people have violated probation. They can communicate with the ADAs earlier on. And parole, has had a little bit more of a difficult time. We had something implemented called less is more as a part of the bail reform process in the state of New York, which is, we all agree bail reform needed to happen, but it has really limited the amount of work that parole can do. So we've collaborated with them. We've had some real great and strong resolutions to some cases. And due to bail reform, it wasn't as easy prior to bail reform because we were able to hold these offenders accountable, or they would at least go into jail to be held for that, to go in for that cooling off period, to give the victim some space and, maybe let the offender think about what he had done or she had done. But we've now started to brainstorm creative sanctioning and what does holding the offender accountable really look like. In one instance, we had two people in our Saugerties jurisdiction. They were alcoholics. They would get into these fist fights with each other and just numerous domestics. Saugerties Police Department was there at least 5-6 times a week. So it was really draining the resources out of the Saugerties Police Department. So what we did was we have an Oracle team, and they are our opioid response team, but they also respond to other forms of substance abuse. So we said, hey, let's get Oracle to meet up with the detective who's assigned to the intimate partner violence intervention out in Saugerties, and have them go out as a team and confront the individuals. So they did that. They were able to speak with one of the individuals, but the intimate partner violence offending had stopped for about a month.
So we want to also think about, we know this is a GVI Workshop Series, but we also want to think a little bit about the intersections between intimate partner violence and group violence. Rachel, do you want to tell us about why it's important that we talk about this intersection?
Yeah, sure. If we were all in a room together, I would probably turn and ask many of you why it felt important. And if this shows up for any of you in your GVI work, right, when you were focusing on reducing gun violence, reducing violence between individuals that are involved in groups, if intimate partner violence ever comes up, and to answer that kind of rhetorical question, I'll say that we know a few things to be true, right? Some of these are cliches, but cliches are cliches for a reason. There's a lot of truth in them. And we know that hurt people. So exposures to violence in general, particularly as children and adolescents, is something that impacts what our future as adults looks like. So exposure to, witnessing, or experiencing violence in your family, right? That is something that you carry with you, right? It increases the likelihood that you may be in a relationship that has violence or abuse, whether you are the victim survivor or you're the person causing harm, right? We know that there's so much about what we talk about as intimate partner violence that's pretty normal these days. And when we are, going about our days and we're talking with people, particularly young people, right, we hear about the things that they may say are totally normal in their lives, but actually are really big red flags, right? And when we think about people that are at highest risk of being hurt, and often we are thinking about young men and women, right? Often young men, right? We need to also acknowledge that we cannot expect anyone, right, to be able to move forward and make the decisions that feel safest and best for them or their families if they don't have the right supports or tools. So we know both anecdotally, right, and from data from our sites and from our partners that there are a lot of places where there is an overlap, right, between community violence, right, and what we are experiencing in our cities and in our neighborhoods, and what's happening in our relationships and what happens behind closed doors. Right? We know that there are often a number of individuals that might be involved, right, that we are seeing in our GVI work, right? And we have the opportunity to highlight for them the ways that engaging in intimate partner violence, right, can be problematic, dangerous, and wrong, right? And what it could look like to make different choices. Right? The big thing for us is to think about how we can explore this. We know that through CVI work, we have a real robust partnership across the country of people that are really focused on bringing everything they can to meet people where they're at to reduce and prevent violence. When it comes to intimate partner violence, it might look different, right? But when we see something, like we would say in New York, if you see something, say something, right? We have an opportunity to shine a light on the things that we might normally put aside or pass off because it's come to us and because we can put attention on it. Right? We know that by thinking about helping someone holistically, right, whether they are a victim survivor or a person causing harm, and sometimes those people can be the same, right? We know that by thinking about the polyvictimization, big word for saying the ways in which they experience multiple victim oppressions, right, is so key to securing what we think of as a safe and just outcome, right? To have more legitimacy in our systems, right? And to have a public safety approach that is driven by and focused on the needs of a community and not done to them. So we thought that this would be a really good opportunity to highlight as you all are thinking about your day-to-day work with GVI or other types of community violence interventions, how when intimate partner violence comes up, right, there are things for us to think about. There are questions we can ask. There are small ways that we can adapt and pivot and be creative. Because all of the things that we've talked about today, whether we're talking about the trust that people have in their systems or the lack thereof, when it comes to cooperating with police and prosecutors, reporting about violence that is happening, being honest about the needs that someone might have, thinking about what it means to set up something to hold someone accountable, which in many ways often looks like helping someone stop the behavior, even if it's for a minute, even if it's for a day or a week, being able to pause someone and give them the opportunity, right, to make a better choice. Right? And we're gonna talk a little bit more in detail about some of the things we know that comes up around intimate partner violence when you are looking at doing GVI. But just to say, I think when I listen to everyone talking about this and I think about this topic, I think to myself that we are often asking people to do something that feels impossibly hard. And that is, we are asking people to change how they are in some of their most personal and most pivotal relationships. right? And often what we hear, particularly from survivors, is they just want the violence to stop, right? That this is not about punishment, right? This is not about what the system might be able to provide in terms of accountability, but that they are looking for this person to get help so they can be better, right? They can be more present as a friend, as a father, as a brother, as a sister or a mother, because we know, right, that this violence can occur regardless of how you identify with your gender or your sexuality, right? And so thinking about what can we do to help people focus on stopping, what does that look like? And sometimes that means a very strong message, right? With the possibility of there being sanctions. They could be criminal, they could be civil, they could be community-based, right? But also shifting that culture around whose responsibility is this to change. We can work with victim survivors to get them to what we think is a safe place. But if we continue to not address and support the individual who's actively causing the harm, right, we are not going to stop victimization. It will continue. So for us, this just felt like a really good opportunity to come together and think about how so much of what we and you all do for your community violence work, for your GVI work, is often going to touch upon this other, often very quiet or closed topic of what's happening in someone's family, what's happening behind closed doors, the ways that they might have learned to use violence, right, or use words incorrectly, right? And how we have an opportunity when we're focusing on people that are at high risk to think about how we incorporate the understanding that intimate partner violence is also violence. Intimate partner violence causes harm, right? And that you are not, right? You are not alone in this. And it is not up to the victim, right, to decide what happens. He or she can make their own choices, including who they want to be in a relationship with. But breaking the law, causing harm, right, being violent is something that we have to put attention on. So if you can't stop, right, we're going to figure out how to stop you. But let's see what we can do, right? Let's acknowledge the ways that we might be able to intervene.
Thank you, Rachel. Thank you for setting that up and framing it and naming why those intersections are important to look at. Very quickly, I want to run through some important numbers, and then we're going to open it up for more conversation amongst all of us. Michael, if you can bring up the next slide. I think we are incredibly lucky. It is an animated slide, so yeah, feel free. There's going to be 3 stats up there. So we're incredibly lucky. Our analyst, Alex Acevedo, who's incredible, he's been able to collect some really important information from the last 17 problem analyses that were conducted for group violence work. These 17 cities are throughout the US, and in looking at understanding the group violence dynamic, he was also able to see where IPV showed up as well. So in looking at only homicides and non-fatal shootings for these 17 cities, IPV and IPV-related spillover crimes made up on average 9% of the serious violence. If we look at the next stat, we see on average IPV for these cities, 4% of IPV and IPV-related spillover was confirmed to be group member involved. Now, this ranged from 0% in some cities to as high as 11% in others. And if we look at the final stat that we have here, it also showed us that for the 17 cities where homicides and non-fatal shootings were evaluated, on average, 26% of those IPV homicides were not group member involved. So these numbers reinforce to us what we already know about IPV, which is that it's serious and can be fatal. Also, we see, just based on the homicide and non-fatal shooting data, that there are those that are group involved and also committing intimate partner violence. What more can we actually learn about these intersections if we're able to see other forms of IPV crimes that are present in the history of individuals that might also be involved in group violence as well? So this is, again, honing in on the point that this is an important issue to think about and want to pay attention to. I think we can actually pull out from the PowerPoint, Michael, if that's okay. We want to have a chance to just kind of pull back and get folks's reactions to some of the information that you've learned here about the intersections between, group violence and IPV, about IPVI in general, the incredible work that our partners do as well, have done on this intervention.
I just want to point out, I really want to apologize to everyone for my interruption. It was actually something important that required my attention. But I do want to note that some of the things that our team really has done is the ability to streamline our mechanism for communication, get our information as close to real time as possible, have quicker responses from our law enforcement and our crime victims advocates. We have ongoing tracking of these offenders. We have a wonderful deputy chief ADA who is brilliant, and her father is also brilliant, and they've developed our Ulster County domestic incident report database. So we have all of the DIRs from Ulster County at large in this database where we can access it and really get a really good view of patterns of offending, and also to track them through the intimate partner offender tracking database, which is linked to the DIR database. They did an amazing job creating this. It's fantastic. It's so much better than a spreadsheet. And then it just enhanced collaboration and information amongst task force members. I'm actually very proud of our team. I think we always have some roadblocks, and I'm sure all of you that do this work understand those roadblocks, but largely I am very grateful to have them as members of our team. Does anyone have questions for us? There's several members on here from our team. We have someone from our Crime Victims Advocates Program, Assistance Program. I'm sorry, I believe probation might still be on. I thought he was on. Brian Brady. Yep, Brian Brady is on.
Yes, I have a question.
Sure.
After giving the warning, what tools are provided to help someone stop engaging in IPV, which is likely all they know?
So we have batterers intervention. We have one batterer, I can't even say that word, batterers intervention programs that's provided by our local social service provider. We also have a pilot ongoing right now, which is called, I'm sure you all have heard of it, MRT, moral recognition therapy. And it's specifically geared towards domestic violence. So we're really hoping to see that this program is working and will continue to work. We have not had anybody reoffend with intimate partner violence since they've been engaged in the moral recognition therapy, and that's been going since April. So that is a huge win. That's great. There are also just various other, the family of Woodstock is our local our community service provider, and they are also case managers, so adult case managers, so they can link these individuals to any other needs they may have, whether it's finding a job, helping them with housing, giving them money to put down on their first month's rent. They run the gamut with the services that they provide. And also, we see a lot of crossover with domestic violence, not that it's a cause of it, but substance abuse. And so I have people come to our custom notifications that are from our Oracle team that have done some great work in getting these people engaged in rehab and all those other things.
And would you be able to layer in on this as well? Like, what did High Point do?
We didn't see that much. We did have some batterers intervention programs, and things like that. What we found, though, over the years is that they can stop. And they don't do it in line at the grocery store most of the time. They don't do it with her brothers and cousins around. So they can stop. They may have grown up a victim of domestic violence or witnessing it, but at some point, they know that what they're doing is wrong. Everyone knows that that's wrong, and and it's not that hard to stop because most of them do it when the door closes. So it thrives in secrecy. So when we started taking away that veil of secrecy, then we noticed that most of them did stop. But we did have some batterers intervention programs that were fairly successful too, just like Cassandra does.
Darlene and Brian, since you've been with the program since go, do you want to maybe mention how it's benefited your program and maybe some of the things that you have seen?
Hi, everyone. So I'm the supervisor at the Crime Victim Assistance Program. So it's been really helpful here to get the domestic incident reports in real time, to be able to conduct quick outreach to survivors. The survivors, the quicker that they receive support, the better the potential outcome. Lethality assessment studies have shown that. So that is helpful. Not everyone wants our services or engages, but we plant seeds. So that's really helpful. But I feel it's also just the level of collaboration that has been discussed here today is fabulous, where we're able to be in contact with, like, say, Cassandra, if we see an issue and then she can bring it to someone else's attention. We're able to quickly speak with someone and have their contact information, find out, like, say, if they're seeking an order of protection or what their immediate needs might be, and we get their permission and then can reach out quickly to an assistant DA, or find out what other needs that they might have that we can try to assist them with. So the time of it is great. The collaboration has been fabulous here, and we're very grateful.
Brian, do you want to chime in about probation?
Sure thing. Brian Brady, I'm one of the probation officers assigned to this program. And so, like Darlene had said, timeliness and collaboration are the two foremost benefits that I've seen. In a lot of cases, the domestic incident reports that are filed after the incident, sometimes it would be a week before I got them. Sometimes I would be finding out from the offender before I found out from the police agency as far as something going on. Our domestic incident reports list a variety of details. Among them are belief of substance use at the time of the offense, as well as potentially other people that were involved or witnessing to the incident. And so for me, it's something that cut down several days to possibly several hours or a day or two to my information being received. And so potentially, either through myself, my office, or with other community partners, we could potentially meet with the offender or the person that was involved in a more realistic time frame to figure out what caused this, to determine whether or not it's something that's going to involve court interaction or potentially a referral to a new service agency based on the nature of the offense.
So there was a question in the meeting chat. It says, how do you determine the level they come in at and how many of these incidents involve guns? So we have an offending criteria that's established, and like pretty much what Fatma had put up, like level D through A. The D is just they can identify the primary aggressor, but there's no charges. C is their first charge, B is their repeat second charge, and A is really like violent or chronic offender. And then, yes, there have been several incidents where a victim does report that there are guns, and or the victim was menaced with a gun by her intimate partner. In that instance, we have someone that works at the sheriff's office who is a one-man band. Hopefully that program will take off, but it's called AVERT. So it's an anti-violence. I can't remember the rest of the, what the letters stand for. If anybody on my team knows, feel free to jump in there. But essentially it's to drive down gun violence, and he'll go meet with people in the community, young kids. He definitely starts with the younger population of youth and tries to sway that, but it is something that we do make known to law enforcement at large once we find out.
And Lisa, I guess more broadly, what I would say is, as Cassandra and Tim both noted, one of the things that we do with our sites is think about how can we analyze what we understand about the violence and come up with something that makes sense for your city, your partners, and your resources. So in some places where we work, they have a criteria, but it's really focused on only the highest level of individuals. So they are focusing on what we have talked about as A's and B's, and they still have something that they think about for how does someone get flagged in for this. And at the same time, there's room for that experience that practitioners have where they can say, you know, this might not have come to people's attention as a B or an A, but this is someone that I think we should talk about and think about because we're concerned. So the idea is to kind of unpack what we understand about IPV in your city and then think, okay, how can we consistently, with legitimacy, right, and in a very real way, engage with survivors and with persons who are causing harm, and what is that going to look like for us? And there is a lot of trial and error, and Cass and her team have been, I think, impressively flexible with taking in what it means to have to reflect on is our criteria right? Right? Just like with any tool or assessment that people use, is it working for us still? What have we learned from it? And how do we have to shift what that means? And the gun piece is also super, super important to mention. There are different ways to think about how to focus on a specific response related to gun-involved intimate partner violence. And I know Cassandra and the team have done work around, you know, what we often talk about as red flag laws, right? Or kind of emergency protective orders. They may not have to do with intimate partner violence. They're more specifically around gun seizure. But there are a lot of creative ways to think about how do we pay attention to
Yeah,
that.
what we also do too is because Crime Victims Assistance Program does their immediate outreach, if they are unable to get in contact with a victim whose offender is now at that high A level classification, and or there's been a gun involved in some capacity, they will reach out to our task force, and we will assign our DA investigator to go ensure victim safety. So they will go to the house and or contact the victim. You know, we really want to, with DV it's very tricky. You know, you don't want to incite something that doesn't need inciting. So our investigator is pretty careful about that.
I want to say something here about how we did things in High Point is our levels. When you get, say you get a D level, if you're on our D level notification list, all of these levels have a different message that goes with it, and ours is scripted. And so we have a list of people who have received a D level message. We have a list of people who have received a C level message, and B level messages they've attended a call in. A level message is consensus of the work group that this person, deterrence is over for this person. We've got to, we all need outreach. I've heard this said before. We all need outreach. Some people just need prison outreach. So our list is a list of people who have received what level of notification. We do have some people, especially at the D level, that we try to find and give that scripted message to, but we can't locate, so they don't go on that list that we keep. Does that make sense? So ours is what notification, what level of messaging have they received?
Thank you, Tim. And what you can see from what both Tim and Cassandra have shared, there are similarities, but there are also differences in how every city does this work. And Lisa, going back to your original question of figuring out, this emphasis of how frequently are guns involved in IPV cases, there are different ways of doing IPVI. What we presented today was the full scale of IPVI, letters A through D. But we are also working with cities where there's an emphasis on the most serious and concerning individuals. So it's a modified version. So it's a focus on just the A and B level, or it can be providing that IPVI lens with a focus on intimate partner violence cases that involve gun violence. So it can range in many different ways. We just wanted to share a general framework of how we think about addressing intimate partner violence today. This has been really incredible. We feel very grateful for Michael and his team sharing space with us. I want to turn it over to Michael again. I know he may have some announcements, but I just wanted to say again, thank you guys for coming and being present here with us.
Thank you so much, Fatma and Rachel. Amazing as always. And Tim and Cassandra for joining us and sharing your insight today, which was amazing. Just a couple of quick housekeeping announcements from us. I'll just share my screen one last time. All right. So like I said earlier, just wanted to mention again that in November, in lieu of a GVI workshop, we'll be supporting the Jacksonville conference, which is the GVI Reboot Stronger Together session on November 7th through 9th. I put the contact information in the chat, so you could reach out to Garland and Brenda, or you could email me and I'll put you in touch with them. And then the next session for our GVI workshop will be in December, likely early December, and it'll be about sustaining the work. So we'll talk about securing funding at the state, federal, local level, managing partnerships, trying to institutionalize the work, things like that, about just kind of keeping the momentum going and keeping the work going. As always, you could reach out to me at gviworkshop@nnscommunities.org with any questions. If you have folks that you want to add to these workshop invites, you could just give them the email address and we'll add them to the list. Our website, nnscommunities.org/GVI workshop, will have a recording of this session, a recording of all our previous sessions, previous slide decks, this slide deck, any other materials we shared. There's some white papers and issue briefs on there, anything that we've covered in the workshops thus far, and we'll update it in a week or so with the material from this or today's workshop. So thank you so much for joining us. Thank you again to our speakers. Feel free to reach out with any questions, and we hope to see you next time. Thank you so much.